What's up, everyone? Aaron Nagler here, PackersNews.com. Late in the day on Monday afternoon, after a initial, maybe a bit unexpected early flurry of free agent activity, basically linking the Packers to a bunch of offensive threats. The defensive side of the ball, somewhat quiet, but it's very early after the legal tampering period began at noon Eastern today, earlier this afternoon. The Packers linked to interest in Jimmy Graham, Sammy Watkins, and Allen Robinson, the two wide receivers and the tight end. Mike starts us off with, why would we look at Sammy Watkins? Well, most likely for speed. He's still a very fast guy, able to get downfield in a hurry. His catch rate isn't great. That's why I think there's probably questions about him, but there's little doubt that he could step on the field and add explosiveness to a Packers offense that has lacked it for a good long while. Hello, everyone chiming in. How are you? Glad to see you all. Paul, how are you? Please don't sign Graham, says Jack. My 2 cents on the Graham thing, I really tend to believe that that is a leverage play by Jimmy Sexton, his agent. My colleague Tom Silverstein pointed out Sexton is a master at creating the perception that a team is got more interest in you than maybe they actually do. I'm not saying that the Packers' interest isn't genuine. I believe it is, but I do think that is a leverage play against the Saints, who is most likely where Jimmy Graham is going to end up. Now, obviously, the Saints are going to want to get Drew Brees back under contract first of all, but once that happens, I expect Graham to end up back in New Orleans, and maybe they'll use Green Bay to drive up the price a little bit against the Saints. Mike says, I like Robinson more than Sammy. I tend to agree. I was asked that question on Twitter. I think he's a more complete receiver. I think he's a much bigger threat all over the field. You can use him in a number of different ways. That's not to diminish Sammy Watkins. I think he's a talented guy, but I think Robinson would be probably the first true prototypical number one wide receiver that Rodgers has ever had to throw to, if he did end up coming to Green Bay. Greg Jennings is obviously a big-time talent, did a lot of damage in the Packers offense. And it's not to take away from Jordy Nelson, who I think was one of the most underrated receivers in his prime. But Allen Robinson is on another level to me. But that's just a personal opinion. I'm sure there will be disagreements. But Robinson would be a huge addition. Now, obviously, the big question is, what would the ripple effect be in regards to both Jordy Nelson and or Randall Cobb and their contracts? That is something that Brian Gutekunst would probably almost certainly have to address. There'd be no way they could pay 4 wide receivers over what would presumably be $10 million a year. If you are the GM, who are you signing and why? Whew, Jason, that would take a long time, much more length than I have for a single sitting live on video. I tend to think this early flurry is more the Packers taking the temperature on guys than it is actual plans to pursue. I do think, I've had a couple questions about the lack of notable names connected to them early on here in the free agency period on the defensive side of the ball. I think there's going to be a lot of corners hitting the market, and the Packers are going to be able to kind of sift through that side, whereas there are hardly any edge rushers making it to market. They'll most likely have to look at the draft in that regard. But yeah, there's no real kind of need to move with urgency this first day, while on the flip side, I think with guys like Allen Robinson and Sammy Watkins, they will get snapped up pretty quickly. Jermaine Johnson going to be overpaid. Hard to say that, Justin. He's going to get paid what the market will bear, and I tend to think he will get a top upper echelon deal for cornerbacks, and he's hitting the market at a good time. There will be a glut of corners on the market, but top end, I guess the creme de la creme, so to speak, of the corners. I think he's got to be in the conversation for the best guy hitting the market. And it will take money for a team to secure his services. Bryson, this offseason is actually exciting. It hasn't even started yet. No, somebody asking us, we seriously need 2, maybe 3 defensive backs. Any news there? No, nothing yet. But as I said, there will be undoubtedly be movement there as the week goes on. But early on, all the interest initially being placed on the wide receivers and the tight end. When do teams have to be under the cap? That would be 4 o'clock on Wednesday, 4 o'clock Eastern. Wouldn't Montgomery be great in the slot? He would be, actually. I think he would be wonderful. Of course, the problem there is that he's been unable to stay on the field. I've seen a lot of suggestions that the Packers cut Cobb and move Montgomery into the slot, as if that would be a seamless transition. But as you guys all know, Montgomery has had major issues with his availability. He has not gone through an entire season even once yet. So while I understand looking at Cobb's cap hit and trying to think of ways to either move on from it or reduce it, I don't think the sliding in Montgomery into the slot and or just quote-unquote just move Jordy into the slot, I don't think it's that easy. Now, maybe those are 2 things they could do to mitigate the loss if they decided to move on from Randall Cobb, but I doubt that's how they're thinking. I don't know that for sure. That's guesswork on my part, but I would be surprised if that was the way they went. Any word, Jordy or Cobb or Matthews, when may we expect it? Dusty, I would think in the next couple of days prior to Wednesday afternoon. 4 p.m. is when they have to be under the cap. Now, they don't necessarily have to make a move. They have to be under the cap, but they are. Essentially, they are $21 million under the cap after the trade of Demarius Randall to Cleveland. So, they can make moves without having to restructure contracts or cut guys. Now, if they want to be major players in free agency, that's a whole other ballgame. But, right now, they'll need $3 or $4 million to sign their rookie class, and then after that, they'll be able to make some moves. But it all depends on what kind of signings they're looking at and what kind of combination they want to go after. But as it stands right now, $21 million under the cap, that's relatively healthy. How does the Bills moving up to number 12 affect the Packers at 14? Great question. Earlier on, the Bills shipped out left tackle Cordy Glenn to the Cincinnati Bengals a little over an hour ago. Jumping, and in the meantime, got the number 12 pick in a swap with the Bengals. That absolutely helps the Packers in so much that either at 12 or maybe even possibly in a jump up even further from that, you got to think the Bills are looking at a quarterback. They moved Tyrod Taylor over there to Cleveland in a trade 2 days ago, on Friday. You have to think the Bills are looking at a quarterback. And anytime any of those teams above the Packers selects a quarterback, that's good for Green Bay because it pushes more talent down to them, either on the offensive or defensive side of the ball. I would suspect they're targeting most likely a defensive player, but you never know. But yeah, it definitely is a good development for Green Bay. There's no doubt about that. Man, I wouldn't mind restructuring Nick Perry's contract. Yeah, it's unfortunate you couldn't stay on the field last year, but remember, when he's healthy and on the field, he plays well. He's a good player. He has just not been able to stay healthy. Now, obviously, that's a big part of the game. It's funny, though, because you look at it, and yes, they had to pay him prior to free agency last year, after pretty much every edge rusher was either franchised or taken off the market by re-signings from their own teams. But you look at the greater kind of the pantheon of pass rushers that have been paid over the last, say, 5 years. Nick Perry comes in relatively low on that list, money-wise. So while in the salary cap structure the Packers have, yes, he's recently been made one of the more higher-paid players in their structure, league-wide, he did not break the bank. He did not get a huge deal. So yes, it's unfortunate that he can't stay on the field, and yes, they're undoubtedly hoping he can turn that around next year, but, I don't think they're going to be ready to do anything with his contract just yet. Now, maybe if 2018 comes and goes and it's another disappointing year as far as his ability to stay on the field, I I don't doubt for a second that they'll do something there. Realistically, who do the Packers get at cornerback? It's hard to say. I know Bob McGinn put out there the other day that they will be going after Tremaine Johnson. I tend to think he's going to price himself out of their range, but you never know. I think Aaron Colvin is a realistic possibility, though I think he'll have a pretty robust market as well. And then, Dominic Rodgers-Cromartie, I know he's older. I know there were rumblings about moving him to safety, but I think he could very much help the Packers at the cornerback spot, especially on the perimeter. Orlando Scandrick is set to be released. Again, I don't think anyone would call him one of the best corners in the game, but he is absolutely an NFL caliber player who could come in and help them immediately. I think there'll be a number of names out there over the next day or two that maybe we weren't expecting or are salary cap casualties that the Packers are going to be able to kind of sift through. But those are some of the names to watch for. And we'll see what else develops over the course of the next day or two leading up to Wednesday at 4 p.m. Let's see. Johnson or Fuller, in your opinion? Well, Preston, I can't imagine the Packers putting some kind of offer together for Fuller on the transition tag down there in Chicago. Now, maybe they try to because they want to, mess with the Bears cap or whatever. But by doing so, they risk the idea of, okay, they put together something that's, say, somewhat prohibitive cap-wise for the Bears. Well, if the Bears balk and then the Packers have to pay them, then that's whatever it ends up being is probably pretty prohibitive for the Packers in their cap. So you better love the player. You better love the guy as far as his ability on the field. So, I would be surprised if that's a route they went. Cut Matthews, save money. Well, it's true. If they do cut Clay Matthews, they have no dead space on the cap as a result. But I don't see them going that route. I would tend to think they'd probably restructure him or extend his contract a few more years because he's one of their better players on defense. I know the sack totals haven't been there, but he's playing probably his best. He probably had his best year this past year that he's had in the last 3 or 4. He's still a good football player, and I don't think it's time for the Packers to move on there. As far as tight end, draft a young talent and pair him with a good blocking tight end. That's a possibility. I think they have to draft one, and I think they have to sign one. I think there's no doubt about that. Now, it doesn't necessarily have to be Jimmy Graham. And I hear today that Austin Seferian-Jenkins is first in line in Seattle, so to speak, which is always interesting when they're going to let Jimmy Graham go. They're going to bring him in. Luke Wilson, who is the backup behind Jimmy Graham, is also set to be a free agent. I think he would be a nice addition in Green Bay. But we'll see. I hope Sue retires. I don't think Ndamukong Suh is ready to retire yet. He's going to get paid next year. Move Clay to the middle. Nathan, it's a real possibility. We asked Mike Pettin about it during his opening press conference. He said he liked Clay's versatility. Of course, we've heard that ad nauseum for the last 3 or 4 years. I think a lot of it depends on who they have at edge and who they can get to rush the passer from the outside. Clay's best days taking on elite tackles one-on-one, those best days are behind him. There's no doubt about that. But he can still be a very effective player, especially in the middle. And I think in order to get him in there on a more regular basis, they need to ensure that they have a little bit more talent on the outside. Let's see. I know Pettin loves tall cornerbacks. I'm thinking Derwin James, Florida State. Rick, I know they talked to him at the Combine. They spoke to him. My colleague, Ryan Wood, wrote a great piece at PackersNews.com about the Packers' supposed interest in James. Make sure you check that out. And I tell you what, now that they've moved on from Demarius Randall, he makes a lot of sense, especially his versatility. You can play him pretty much all over the secondary. He'd be an intriguing match for the Packers and their new defense. Let's make a move on Trey Burton. Woo, woo. All caps. I love it when you guys go all caps on me. Oh my God, it's Paul Giamatti. Emily, you're not the first person to say that. I used to get Kenneth Branagh, but then I got glasses. Do you think Demarius will do better now that he will play safety for the Browns? Well, you have to think so, right? All of his best plays are kind of made with his eyes on the quarterback, not having to flip his hips. The one issue you wonder about there is his tackling ability, but that did improve the second half of the year last year, kind of from the Lions game on. So, yeah, we'll see. Randall trade was great. Weren't you always happy with him? Are you new here? I thought he played very well in the second half of the season. There's no doubt about that, but always happy with him. That's a new one. He can't tackle, you say. Oh, well, like I said, he improved in his tackling last year, especially if you go and you watch from the Lions game right through week 14. He was much better tackling, and I think that's probably what Elliott Wolf and Alonzo Highsmith saw, the whole reason they wanted to make that trade. I will never understand the cut Cobb crowd. Steve, you and me both, brother. Predict the starting running back? Robert, I predict Aaron Jones will improve in pass protection over the summer, and he will grab the number one spot by October. How's that? Randall sure is burning all the bridges on the way out, too. Yeah, Meg, I suppose, a little bit. He hasn't been overt about it. I know he's been referencing stuff on Twitter and on Instagram, but I still haven't seen anything too, malicious. I'm sure he feels a little slighted and a little underappreciated, but hasn't reached Greg Jennings' level yet. Eric Ebron in Green Bay. I guess it's a possibility, especially now that the Lions are reportedly bringing in Burton for a look. You would think that would mean Ebron's days are numbered. Nothing about him has ever really excited me as a player, but they need bodies, so it's a possibility. Why did they not go after Talib, veteran guy on the cheap? On the cheap? Have you seen his contract? It's $11 million for 2018. That ain't on the cheap. It is time to move on from Davis and Janis. Sam, I've been saying for a while it's time to move on from Davis. I think, he's not much of a deep threat. He hasn't looked to develop in that way at all. And as a returner, yes, they got one really timely big return from him in that Cleveland game, but to get there, they had to sit through a year of really questionable decision-making at the punt return spot. I think they can do better. I think guys like Geronimo Allison, D'Angelo Yancey, even Michael Clark, probably that's where I would kind of lean towards, allowing and giving playing time to. I know the speed is tantalizing for Davis, but that's pretty much what he's got as his one thing, and it's not enough to separate him. Do you think Aaron Rodgers 12 will take a pay cut to free up cap space? No. I do think that they will try to structure his deal so that his cap hit is lessened in 2018, which will help them. He's set to be, I believe, a $22 million cap hit. They can extend his deal 4 or 5 years and greatly reduce. They can free almost up to $16 million worth of cap space. But they're still going to pay him. He's going to get like $30 million guaranteed, probably not $30 million guaranteed, sorry, probably a $30 million salary up front, and that will probably escalate. Any word on Jordy or Clay contracts? No, and nothing yet. Davis looked okay at wide receiver week 17. I guess, Connor. You go back a week before, he lost a perfectly placed ball in the lights. That's your deep threat. I don't know, man. I just don't see it with him. Fire Gutekunst and rehire Tom Bratz. There you go, Mike. That is old school. Dennis, we need a healthy right tackle. Who is it? That is a very good question. That is probably one of the bigger questions facing Gutekunst in his first year on the job. I know Brian Bulaga in a radio interview last week with Jason Wilde mentioned that he and his representatives have not heard anything from the Packers. He's down in Florida working out. All signs point to him returning. Now don't take that to the bank because anything can happen. But even if Bulaga is back, I can't imagine that he's ready for the beginning of the year, which means they're going to need someone at right tackle. Now, who that will be, I tend to think it'll probably be a draft choice because there's not a whole lot out there on the market, on the free agent market. But you never know. Maybe someone comes free unexpectedly. Maybe they swing a trade. But right now, I tend to think it's got to be a draft pick because I don't trust any of the guys on the squad at the moment, your Kyle Murphys and what have you, to start for the 6 games or whatever it would be while Balaga's on the PUP. Davis is still better than Janis. Not at his main job, which would be, I guess for Janis, it's punt coverage and coverage units in general. Davis doesn't do anything as well as Janis covers punts and kicks, so I'm not sure I agree there. How about Rodgers Cromartie or either the Jaguars corners? I mentioned both of them earlier in the video. I do agree Colvin is a guy they really should go after. And Rodgers Cromartie, I think, could help them, although I think he'll have a decent market. We'll see. I think, actually, they'll both have a decent market, but I think Rodgers Cromartie will probably be a little bit more accessible. That's very kind of you, Mike. Someday. What is it going to cost to keep Morgan? Good question, Preston. I would tend to think around $10 million per year, which may be a little bit too expensive for the Packers. You know, there's a reason they drafted Josh Jones last year, most likely with the window in mind that Morgan Burnett could leave. You know, Packers giving out third contracts. I know Ted Thompson's not calling the shots anymore, but the Packers giving out third contracts is a rare thing, and I'd be surprised if that changed in Morgan Burnett's case. Deborah, I think people are kidding about wanting Gutekunst fired. At least that's what I'm hoping. I'll take one or two more here. How much money will it take to get Mo Wilkerson? That's a really good question, Brian. I don't really have a feel for it. I would probably guess, I'm going to say anywhere between $5 and $8 million a year, depending. You know, it's hard to say because he's obviously got interest. He's got interest. He's visited Green Bay, New Orleans, and he's visiting Washington today, or tomorrow, starting today and tomorrow. You know, I don't know, man. All it takes is one team with a lot of cap space to give up a bunch of money for him, and then that kind of ruins your chances. But I tend to think the Mike Pettin thing really helps them. How much and what will that translate to as far as salary savings? I don't know. That's hard to say. I'm curious to see what he ends up signing for, whether it's in Green Bay or someplace else. Tamba Ali, Chase, I'd be lying if I said that I didn't think they should look at him. I know he's older. I know he's had a lot of tread on the tires, but he can still rush the passer. He can still be effective. The problem is like he's clearly not the player he was. He's got to be situational. And you bring in a guy like that, he's clearly not going to be helping you on special teams. So that's a roster spot for a guy who's probably not going to play much more than, obvious passing situations. And he's not going to give you much against the run. But, if he gets to the quarterback once or twice a game, really, I think it's kind of worth it, Sign Pac-Man Jones. Virgil, I can't imagine Mark Murphy signing off on that one. Let's see. These players know the Packers are struggling with cap space. The Packers aren't really struggling with cap space. They got to make some moves and they can open some more up. But $21 million under the cap, that's fine. It's the least amount they've had in quite a while, but that just speaks to how much, they've kept things healthy in the past and wide open. Remember, they've made 2 signings already. The reason they're down to $21 million is because of the Corey Linsley and Devontae Adams signings. So they're not. You guys act like they're like, who was it? The Saints back in the day, or the Cowboys who had, after Troy Aikman retired, they had like 65% of their salary cap was in dead money or something. They're fine. They're good. They can make some moves. You're welcome, David. Can they sign Mo Robinson and a corner? I think they can. I think they probably have to do some restructurings to make all 3 of those happen. I think they could do 2 of them as they're presently situated, but to do all 3, I think they would have to make at least one move. Whether that's extending Matthews, getting the Aaron Rodgers deal done, etc. But one of those things would have to happen, I would think, for all 3 of those to occur. What about Elvis Dumerville? Dan, I loved him last offseason for the Packers, and they never showed any interest. So I can't imagine that he's a year older Now he's available. Maybe Gutekunst is a fan, but we didn't even hear rumblings about it last year, and he sat out there forever. So, maybe the Packers kick the tires there, but I'd be surprised. Just because, like I said, he was out there for a long time last year, and they never even took a look. Robinson or Watkins? I said earlier in the video, make sure you watch it after I'm done. I'll definitely go Robinson. I think he's a much more complete player. Sheldon Richardson, I tell you what, I love him as a player. Maybe if they miss out on Wilkerson, maybe they talk to him. Or maybe they look to the draft for another defensive lineman. But I tell you what, he would be a great addition. He's a very good young player. And I know, he obviously had his falling out here in New York with the Jets. But he played very well for Seattle last year. And I would tend to think they're going to try and re-sign him. But if he does hit the market, that's someone they should be in on. Why aren't you talking about Malcolm Butler? Okay, I'm talking about Malcolm Butler. Malcolm Butler is about to be a free agent who's going to get paid big, huge, gargantuan sacks of money, and I don't see the Packers doing that. I have now spoken about Malcolm Butler. Will an Aaron Rodgers deal potentially free up cap space this year? Yep, talked about it a little earlier in the video. Make sure you go back and watch it. But yes, it doesn't necessarily automatically do that, but they can structure it that way. But by doing so, you're kind of kicking the can down the street a little bit as far as what you're going to be owing Rodgers down the line. But yes, they can absolutely greatly reduce his cap number, which is set to be around $22 million in 2018, as it stands right here today, Monday, approaching 6 o'clock. All right, everybody. Thank you so much. I'm sorry if I didn't get to your question, but there's a whole lot of them here. And you guys, I know you're all just incredibly passionate about the Packers. And I'm always incredibly flattered that you make me part of your Packers routine. I'll be back tomorrow. In the meantime, make sure you're checking PackersNews.com. Pete Doherty just dropped a really great column about why it's smart for the Packers to look at guys like Allen Robinson and Sammy Watkins. So make sure you check that out. Make sure you check out everything at PackersNews.com. In the meantime, I'll talk to you guys tomorrow.